So out of all the albums that came out last weekend, like there were like 6 or 7 big releases that came out. This was the one that really hit me the hardest, and I really have to talk about it. So let's dive in. The All Is One by Motorpsycho. So Motorpsycho is a Norwegian prog band. They're a very eclectic progressive rock band. They got their start in the very early 90s, and I believe this is their 24th studio release, which is mind-boggling. Like, these guys are non-stop. They put out an album every other year at the latest. I really got into them in their 2012 release of The Death-Defying Unicorn. That was probably my favorite album of that year. And then I went back and, sampled albums here and there. I really loved Heavy Metal Fruit. That one's still one of my favorite albums of theirs. I know they really got a massive hit with Timothy's Monster, as well as Philanthropine? I think that's the one, the 2001 release. And then since 2012, I have been listening to all their new releases pretty loyally. And I've very rarely been full on disappointed. I think the most that I've gotten has been like a lukewarm, but for the most part, every album that I've listened to, I've enjoyed. They've always had this moment on each of their albums that I felt was like touching the divine. Like, they're definitely that type of a band that know how to orchestrate harmonies, rhythms, and to craft such beautiful music. And they've always straddled that line of this post-rock grunge without ever landing in any one genre. So they're definitely more of like that heavy prog aspect, because they're not metal, but they're also more than just your typical rock. What they're able to do with these long soaring soundscapes have always been my favorite aspect of the band, is these long drawn out jam sessions. So where are we going for The All Is One? It's such an odd album. And I'm still, even with about 5 days under my belt of really digging this album and getting into it, I still recognize the fact that I have a lot more listening to do. So a lot of this is still very first impressions. And I'm coming to the table knowing that. But my first big impression of this album is that it's really an album within an album. And that is maybe my biggest, not criticism, but concern about this album. Because we have 4 tracks, and then we come into this album length piece of music, the NOX Chronicles, parts 1 through 5, which essentially make up 40 minutes worth of music. And then we have another 4 tracks. So in that sense, the 4 tracks that open the album up and the 4 tracks that close the album off are in and of itself one complete album. And then we have this 40 minutes worth of music that sounds very, very different from any of these, being sandwiched right in the middle. On the one hand, I love it. Like, I really, really love this different style, this different flavor, because in this sense, we have an appetizer and we have a dessert and then we have a main course. And that's really interesting. I really like how they're able to try this new kind of style. But on the other hand, it also makes for a very strange sit down and listen. The first 4 tracks, The All Is One, the title track, The Same Old Rock and Roll, One Must Imagine Sisyphus Happy, The Magpie, and Delusion, are very Motorpsycho single tracks. Like, these are kind of the tracks that they've been playing around with. Like, I'm loving the groove styles, how heavy hitting some of these tracks are. I really love the overall structure of a lot of the sounds that are coming from that. And the same can be said for the last 4 tracks, A Little Light, Dream of Fancy, The Dower, and Like Chrome. All of these are much more of like their closer tracks. So if it was just these 8 tracks, we would have a very solid standard Motorpsycho release. But then we have the NOX suite being that 40 minutes in the middle. And that is where the album really shines. And that's why I feel like that is where we have this album within an album. This is where we have those longer, drawn out build-ups, these giant jam sessions that stretch on into the 15 and 20 minutes. This is where I really gravitate to these tracks, and I just feel myself being drifted away. I love how all these tracks help build up this massive Goliath, so that when we have Circles Around the Sun Part 1 opening it up, and then we come into the Ouroboros, the strange loop, where it really is like the snake eating itself. I love this concept of this cyclical track that's almost repeating itself, and really where we have parts, 3 being the Ascension, within part 4, this Night of Pan builds up right into Circles Around the Sun Part 2, and it's that big cyclical Ouroboros eating itself, this massive Goliath oomph. And I love how it really plays into this concept of the overall album, which is the all is one, because the overall album itself is one piece of music, and this NOX suite being part of that. So on the one hand, it's like this is really the album, and all these other parts are circling around it. But on the other hand, it's also the all is one. It's like, I don't know, I'm really loving my brain playing around this concept that they bring into this, and all these little tiny homages to that throughout not only the NOX track, but the overall album itself. So yeah, for those who are seasoned in progressive rock, you're going to love this album. You really, really are. And even for those who are not as familiar with this style, I think this might be a really, really good entry point for what to expect this style of music doing. Because even if you can't really get your head around that big NOX suite, you're still going to have a lot of really nice tracks. You're going to have a lot of these really smaller tracks kind of peppered around it. So you're still going to have that bite-sized tracks to hang on to as you're being pulled through this massive Goliath that is the middle section of this album. So where normally this style of, construction of an album would not flavor very well in my mind, I feel like it's still presented in a very good way that is not only elevating the music around it, playing within the concept that the boys are bringing down, but provides a start and finish full album. Where other bands have tried this and failed, I feel like Motorpsycho has tried it and succeeded. So yeah. Now, I still need some time with it. I'm not quite ready to give it the full masterpiece status, but I'm very, very close. Like, I really need to say I'm very close to give it the full-on masterpiece. At this time, though, I'm going to have to say that I love it with my whole heart. I see that there's a few moments that I probably would have tweaked a little bit more and I need a little bit more time with, especially within the NOX suite. There's a few moments where I feel like the big build-up that they built up to needed to have a little bit of a bigger push, and I feel like they maybe have stayed a little too long in certain sections, but I feel like that's just me needing a little bit more time with it. So I'm going to leave it with I love it with my whole heart. Maybe at the end of the year, I'll elevate it to that whole masterpiece status, but that's where I'm at right now with it. What do you guys think about this album? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Whatever you thought, let me know of your own comments by commenting down below. Thank you guys so much for watching. As always, you guys are definitely the best. And until next time, notes out.